Okay, so these are chapters 6, 7, and 8. Chapter 6, The Night When Raphael Danced, told by my uncle. It was Sunday, said my uncle. The soldier arrived in his boat in the early afternoon when everything was quiet. He lowered his anchor a few meters from the shore, as usual, and walked up the sand to the houses. He never pulled his boat up onto the beach. It was a heavy boat, and he didn't want to break the engine. He always left it about 1 meter off the water. That day he came first to the cafe. He sat and talked with me and some of the men. We all sat outside the cafe and listened to his stories. Then later in the afternoon he went to Rodrigo's shop and bought a few things. He had a big can of paraffin in his boat for Rodrigo's new lamp. I saw him give it to him. The soldier and Rodrigo sat and talked and drank coffee outside the shop for about an hour. When it got dark, he went with Rodrigo into the house behind the shop. I could see the bright light in the lamp through the window. Then the soldier had a meal with Rodrigo. After the meal, he came back to the cafe and sat with me and some of the fishermen. It was very dark and we sat inside. The soldier seemed very happy. He told us a lot of funny stories about his life as a soldier. Then, about 9 o'clock, Raphael came into the cafe. We were surprised to see him because Raphael didn't spend a lot of time at the cafe, and he never came into the cafe when the soldier was there. That night he was wearing his best clothes. Usually he wore his old clothes, even in the cafe. He was wearing his best shirt and trousers. His face and hands were very clean, and his hair was still wet and shiny from washing. I asked myself, is he trying to show the soldier that he's not just a poor fisherman? The soldier knew Raphael. He knew that he wanted to marry Anita. Everyone in the village talked about it. Raphael knew that the soldier was also interested in her. Everyone in the village talked about that too. But nobody knew the secret game that the soldier was playing. Raphael and the soldier didn't speak. The cafe was quiet. Nobody spoke. Raphael and the soldier Suddenly the soldier took a cassette from his pocket. Let's have some music, he said, giving me the cassette. I took it and put it in the player. I remember it was a love song. It was sung by a girl with a soft and beautiful voice. We all sat and listened to it. Raphael smiled and listened too. When the cassette ended, I put another cassette in the player, but the soldier stood up. It was getting late, he said. I must go. He went out into the dark night. It was about 10 o'clock, I think, his usual time. A few minutes later, we heard the noise when he started the engine of his boat. Then the sound of the engine went slowly along the coast. Soon everything was quiet again. We could hear only the sea and the music. The girl on the cassette was singing another love song. It was a sad song, slow but strong. The fisherman and I sat quietly and listened. Suddenly Raphael stood up in the corner of the cafe and began very slowly to dance. Alone in the shadows, his eyes closed. He moved to the music. He danced, his head back, eyes closed, a strange half-smile on his face. We all watched him in surprise. After a few minutes we laughed and went on talking, but Raphael went on dancing along for the rest of the evening. Every time the music stopped, he looked at me with big dark eyes and said, "Again." And I put another cassette in the machine. Then Raphael smiled, closed his eyes, and continued dancing. At midnight, all the other men went off to bed. Raphael was still there, still dancing. I watched the poor boy until the song ended. Then I switched off the machine, and I said good night to him and sent him home to bed. Then the next morning, before daylight, we heard shouting and crying from Rodrigo's house. The news went around the village like fire. Anita wasn't there. Rodrigo sent all his family and friends to look for her. They look along every road, big and small. They look into the fields and along the beach, in the rocks, everywhere. Later Raphael came out of his house with his mother. I told them about Anita, and they were very surprised. We all were. Raphael went to his boat immediately. He planned to sail along the coast and look for her. He sailed away to the west. I watched him until I could see him. He sailed round the rocks at the end of the village. He was looking at the land as he went. The next time I saw him, he was mad. Everyone in the village was out looking for Anita that morning, but nobody found her. Then Santiago couldn't find his old donkey. He came to Rodrigo's shop. He was shouting that Anita took it. Rodrigo wasn't very angry. He wanted to hit Santiago and knocked him down. I thought he wanted to kill the old man. Some friends of Santiago took him away quickly, and after that he said nothing more about the donkey. Then early in the afternoon, some of the fishermen found Raphael. He was about a kilometer west of the village, in a quiet place near the high rocks. His boat wasn't far from the shore, and Raphael was lying in the bottom of it. He was wet and dirty. He was looking up the sky and laughing, and he was completely mad. They brought him and the boat back to the village. His mother and I washed him and gave him some water. We put him to bed. But he lay and made noises all night. He screamed and fought. He was like a mad animal. The next day he went out of the house and sat by his boat. He looked at the sea all day and said nothing. We waited day after day. We gave him food and drink. We washed him when we could, but he was like a small child. We waited for him to get better, but he never did. And you never found out what made him mad? I asked my uncle. He never speaks, only about the ring. You know everything that I know now, he said. When we were washing the poor boy, we found the old ring on the fishing line around his neck. When we tried to take it off, he screamed, so we left it there. All these years, he still wears it around his neck. He gave 6 months of his life to buy that ring, his present for Anita, which she never had. Chapter 7. 2 Visits. The next morning, I went with my uncle to see Rodrigo, the shopkeeper. He had a fine supermarket now, built of stone. He still lived in a house behind the shop, but now the house was 2 floors high and had a garden with a wall around it. He also had his own lorry with his name on it, and there was a new car next to the shop. It was clear that Rodrigo had plenty of money now. Inside the supermarket, there were all kinds of tins and packets. There were boxes of fresh fruits and vegetables outside the door. It was the biggest shop in the village, and it seemed to sell everything. Rodrigo was a big, heavy man. He was about 50 years old, and he wore a fine white suit and a white hat. When we arrived, he was unloading boxes of tins from the lorry. He was picking them up 3 at a time and taking them into the shop. He was big and fat, and he was still a very strong man. He was polite and friendly to my uncle and me. He knew I was a doctor. He invited us into the house. We sat and had coffee and talked about the changes in the village since my first visit as a boy. At last I told him my ideas for helping Raphael. Then he wasn't so friendly. A doctor, he said. He needs more than a doctor. I don't know why he's crazy. Nobody does. God knows. I have helped him and his mother over the years. I have given them food when they were hungry and money when they needed it. His poor mother was a good and hard-working woman. Now she's dead. It was a terrible thing to happen to her. Terrible. First, her young husband was killed by a shark. Then her only son went crazy and lived on the beach like an animal. Some people say that love made him mad. But you are an intelligent man, doctor. You have studied at university. Does a young man of 18 years go mad for love of a girl? A strong young man in good health? It is a stupid idea. I believe he wasn't in good health. I think he was ill. I don't know the problem exactly. You are the doctor. Help him. Make him better if you can. But look for the facts. Don't listen to people's silly stories. So you don't think that your daughter Anita was the reason for his madness? I asked. Rodrigo didn't look at us. He looked at the wall for a long time. I don't have a daughter called Anita, he said at last. I had one many years ago, but she's dead. After that, he said nothing more about Rafael or Anita. Soon we thanked him and left. Later that morning, a man came to my uncle's house. He was small and thin. He stood at the back of the door with his head in his hands. When my uncle saw him, he brought him inside. He found a chair for him and gave him a drink. "This is Luis Valdez," he said to me. "He's a farmer. He has a farm just outside the village to the east." We sat and talked about farms and the weather. Then the man began to ask me about Rafael. "Is it true, the story that I hear?" he asked. "Are you trying to save Rafael, the poor crazy boy?" "I'm a doctor," I answered. "And yes, I am interested in Rafael. I am trying to find out why he went mad. Perhaps I can make him better. Perhaps not." "My wife asked me to talk to you," he said. "She's Marta, Rodrigo's second daughter and Anita's younger sister. She says she wants to talk to you about Anita and Rafael, but it must be a secret. She knows things that even her father Rodrigo doesn't know. She wants to help Rafael, but she doesn't want to make her father angry or unhappy after all these years." "Her secrets will be safe with me, I think," I said. "I don't want to make the people in the village unhappy. I only want to help Rafael. If she knows anything about Rafael, I will be happy to talk to her." That evening I went alone to Luis' house. Luis sent his children to bed and Marta began to tell me her story. The Young Princess, told by Marta. "I am Rodrigo's second daughter," Marta told me. "I was 7 years younger than Anita. When I was a little girl, it was very strange. Anita was beautiful. I wasn't. Anita was clever. I wasn't. She could read and tell stories, sing and draw pictures. I couldn't. I was small, fat and stupid, but I've been lucky. I married a good husband." She laughed quietly. I go to meet my prince," she said. That was all that she said. Her head was full of stories that she read in her books. She loved the stories about princes and princesses, the stories about magic carpets which could fly, the magic lamps and rings. These were the stories that she told us most often. She didn't have to read them. She knew them all. She imagined that she was a beautiful princess in a story. She never believed that she was only a shopkeeper's child. Perhaps a king gave her to her parents in secret when she was a baby. She had many strange and silly ideas in her head. But who did she go to see? Who was the prince? I asked Marta. It was Rafael, of course, she replied. They were in love, even when they were very little children. She went out at night to the big rocks at the end of the beach. Rafael came and met her there. They sat there in the rocks in the moonlight. They talked about their love and the happy married life that they planned. Our parents had no idea that she was doing this. Of course, Anita told me to keep quiet about it. If you tell anyone, she said, I will say terrible things about you to our parents. They will believe me. They won't believe you. And it was true. I knew it was true. They always believed Anita. She could always do what she wanted, and I was always in trouble. So I said nothing. Then Rafael went away to work in the port for 6 months. Anita lost her prince. In the daytime, she was the same as before, but at night she cried in her bed because Rafael was far away. But when he came back, she was happy again. She went to meet him at the big rocks. After a few days, she came back from one of these meetings with a ring on her finger. She showed it to me in the moonlight in her room. It was the gold ring in the shape of a fish. She was very proud of it. She wore it on her finger when she went to meet Rafael. At other times, she kept